The Gabriel Davis takes are all over the place. Is he the right wide receiver two for the Buffalo Bills offense? We're taking a deep dive into all things Gabe Davis today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and please be sure to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I want to break down Buffalo Bills wide receiver Gabriel Davis. And I see a lot of takes out there about what he is, what he isn't, what the Bills need to do. And so let's take all the information today and talk about the path forward. So we're going to set the stage. We're going to talk about what he's accomplished, what's the story so far with Gabe Davis. Then we're going to get into the film. I spent some time watching his tape this morning, and I want to talk about what I saw, the skills that he has and doesn't have, and then I want to talk about the future and really focus in on what I think his contract value is should he earn an extension with the team. So let's do it. Let's set the stage here by getting into the background and some of the numbers behind Gabriel Davis, the Bills wide receiver. So obviously a 2020 fourth-round pick out of Central Florida, the number 128 overall pick in the draft. He's 23 years old. He turns 24 this month in April. And of course, he's entering the final year of his rookie contract, which was a 4-year, $3.9 million deal. Last season, he caught 48 passes on 93 targets, 836 yards, 7 touchdowns. Those yards, those touchdowns, that's very good wide receiver to production. Now, when you kind of get into the numbers a little bit more, there's some things that become concerning, and we'll talk about those numbers and then, of course, get into the film and talk about why some of these numbers are what they are. But the first thing that I want to bring up when it comes to the non-volume stats of Gabe Davis last year is Josh Allen's passer rating when targeting Gabriel Davis. It was 80.7 when he threw the football to Gabe Davis. That's extremely low. And his first 2 seasons in the NFL, it was around 110. So you had a big drop in passer rating when targeting Gabriel Davis last year. Also, his reception percentage is very low, and this is a number that I see a lot of people talking about on social media. His reception percentage is 51.6%. That's a very poor number. And his first 2 seasons, it was 57.4%, which is still low. Now, I understand that that number is due to a number of factors, including a high average depth of target, and some of it has to do with catchable targets. But that said, it's still way too low. Given the spread dynamics of the Bills' offense, the attention that Stefon Diggs commands, there should be significantly better efficiency when Josh Allen targets his number 2 wide receiver. Gabe Davis last year had 17.4 yards per reception. That's the highest of his career. 2.9 yards after catch per reception. That is a very, very small number. That's actually a full yard less than his first 2 seasons at 3.9, and that's still low. We mentioned his average depth of target last year. It was 16.3 yards from the line of scrimmage was his average depth of target. That is a very, very high number for a guy that gets the type of volume that Gabe Davis got last year. In fact, it's the highest in the NFL among wide receivers with at least 50 targets. Now, I've seen a lot of commentary about Gabe Davis and his low target efficiency and how it's because of his average depth of target being so far down the field. The question that I have about that is, why are we not asking ourselves more about why his average depth of target is always so far down the field, instead of making an excuse for Gabe and saying, well, of course his target efficiency is low because he doesn't get the chance to catch the ball in the short to intermediate areas of the field. Well, why is that? And it's not just a last year thing. It's not just a Ken Dorsey doesn't know how to use Gabe Davis thing. It's literally his entire meaningful football career to this point across 3 different offensive coordinators. Going back to his last 2 years in college with Josh Heupel as the offensive coordinator and play caller, in 2018, his average depth of target was 14.3. His last year at UCF, it was 16.5 in 2019. In 2020, it was 17.1 under Brian Daboll. In 2021, it was 14.5 under Brian Daboll. And last year in 2022, it was 16.3 under Ken Dorsey. The consistently high average depth of target across 3 offensive coordinators spanning 5 seasons speaks to a different question that we need to be asking. You can't just say, well, of course Gabe Davis's target efficiency is low because he doesn't get the opportunity to catch quick passes. Well, why isn't he getting that opportunity? It's because of the limitations of his skill set, which we're going to talk about in the next segment. He's not been a big enough factor in the short to intermediate areas of the field because he isn't a quick separator. He's not a dynamic route runner. He doesn't uncover quickly. That's why he's not getting a chance to catch quick passes. And 3 different offensive coordinators are fully aware of that. A couple more numbers I want to mention before we talk about what the film revealed. His contested catch rate last year was 35%, which was a huge dip from 2021 where it was 72.7%. But then as a rookie, it was 26.7%. Last year was clearly the outlier. When I say last year, I mean 2021. His contested catch win rate in college was only 40% in a group of 5 conference, the AAC, playing for UCF. His drop rate last year, 12.7%, which is up from 10.3% his first 2 seasons. His drop rate in college was 9.5%. So I think it's fair to assume that a 10% drop rate for Gabe Davis is going to happen on a yearly basis. So those are some of the metrics that I wanted you to be aware of before we dive into the film and what that revealed to me, which we're going to talk about in the next segment. But first, need to tell you about Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this game app, and if you think you'd make a good GM, well, then you got to try it out. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every aspect of your team as you play through seasons and you try to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for hiring coaches and coordinators, managing finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms. You have to deal with free agency, the draft, injuries, personnel issues, all the ups and downs of a season, all this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free, playable, offline, play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Bills listeners, listen up. You get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, again, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. So let's talk about the film and what I uncovered about studying Gabe Davis this morning. And I watched 3 games. I watched the Rams game so that I could see what he looked like before the ankle injury, which, was certainly something that limited him this past year. I watched the Vikings game because he had a bunch of targets, and I watched the New England game in Week 18 because he had a bunch of targets and actually didn't catch many of them. So I wanted to kind of get a good look at all the stuff as it relates to Gabe Davis from 2022. And obviously I'm keenly aware of Gabe Davis before the film study, right? I just kind of wanted to look at it with fresh eyes and see what it revealed to me. And this is what I have to share with you today. We'll start with the good and then we'll get into some of the concerning stuff. All right, so what do I like about Gabe Davis, the player I watched on film? I really like his route tempo. I think that's an underrated component of running routes is your ability to vary your pace and use that to set up your route, whether it's kind of lulling the cornerback to sleep and then kind of accelerating and trying to push vertical, whether it's working your route tempo in such a way to set up a horizontal break, working your route tempo to allow yourself to read coverage and get to space and make yourself available in zone. All of that checks out very well for Gabe Davis. I think that's a strength of his game. I think Gabe Davis makes really good adjustments to zone coverage and does a great job of making himself available. And the Bills obviously get a good amount of zone coverage. And so how he adjusts some of those deep in routes, how he adjusts some of his seam routes, how he adjusts some of his deep outs, all of those are good. I think he does a very good job of that, of seeing coverage rotations, understanding where space is going to be available, getting to that space, and presenting a target for Josh Allen. He's also very good in the scramble drill. So when things break down and Josh Allen gets outside of structure, Gabe Davis does a very good job of working back to the football and trying to make himself available for Josh Allen. The next thing I'll say is I have a lot of respect for the amount of snaps he plays. He's on the field almost every single snap, and that means he runs a lot of routes, a lot of deep routes, right? There's a conditioning aspect to that. But also, the Bills ask Gabe Davis to do some really hard things as a blocker. They are not shy about putting him play side in the backfield or right off the tight end and ask him to block a linebacker or chip on a defensive end. And I'll say that the results are very mixed, but I have a lot of respect for that type of stuff that the Bills ask him to do and how he competes. Now, I'd also say that that's something I wish the Bills would evolve from and not ask him to do that and use some bigger people in the trenches to create some running lanes as opposed to Gabe Davis having to go in there and, mix it up with those big old dudes inside. But I gained a lot of respect for what they ask him to do as a blocker and how he competes. Again, the results weren't always very good, but I think some of those assignments were very, very challenging. I think he does a good job when he's able to stack a corner vertically. And what I mean by that is get on top of them. So when he wants to run a vertical route and that's required of him to get between or get himself in a position where that corner is between the football and him, right? Vertical leverage, staying on top, stacking, getting on top of a corner and providing that window down the field for Josh Allen. I think when he's able to establish that vertical leverage, he maintains it very well. He's tough for opponents to kind of play through. And that's why, despite not being an explosive receiver with great vertical speed, he's able to win down the field. It's because he's able to get on top of corners and stay on top of them and create that down the field window for Josh Allen. I think he does a very good job of that. I think generally speaking, he does well to establish leverage and put himself in good positions at the catch point. And I'll be honest with you, and I'm looking at my notes here, that's something that I would like to see the Bills tap into more of, because I think his ability to get on top of corners vertically puts them in a position where they play him a little bit differently. And so I want to see him work back down stem quite a bit, because I think corners are concerned with Gabe getting on top of them. And so they're willing to kind of play him a little more loose. And I think you kind of take advantage of that and have him work back down stem more frequently. And even on some of the routes where he can use his size and physicality to kind of cross the face of a DB and maintain that leverage. I'm thinking about glance routes, right? I'd like to see more of that from Gabe Davis, because I think those are areas that he can really help this football team that maybe he doesn't get enough opportunity. The last thing I'll say under the good is that I think he's got really good ball skills. Now, ball skills are different than hands, okay? We'll talk about hands because I think that's a weakness of Gabe Davis, but ball skills are different. He puts himself in good positions to catch the football. I think he tracks it well. I think he adjusts to the football well in terms of putting him in position to finish at the catch point. Now, he doesn't finish with consistency, but I think he gets himself in good positions to do so. Now, as for the concerns, I have 3 things that I want to mention here. And it's not a long list of concerns, but they're concerning concerns. These are not things that you wish were true about a volume number 2 wide receiver for a high volume passing offense. The first thing is that he's just not a dynamic route runner or separator. He just isn't. Separation quickness is lacking. When he gets to a top of a route and he has to sink his hips, get in and out of a break with explosiveness, I don't see it. And he's certainly not deceptive doing so. Now, I mentioned he works his route tempos very, very well, but in terms of having a lot of twitch and stutter to really put corners in a blender and then explosively and fluidly get in and out of a break, I don't see it. His speed is very, very gradual. He's got build-up speed, so it takes him some time to get to his top gear, which his top gear is still not that great. And so for a guy that you want to use down the field, it can really kind of take him some time to get to that top speed, and he's never going to be somebody who's just going to pull away from coverage with any level of consistency, right? Because he's not a burner. And so you got gradual speed, you got poor separation quickness at the top of routes. And so just generally speaking, well, why doesn't Gabe Davis get more opportunities to catch the ball in the short to intermediate areas of the field? Well, he's not a dynamic route runner with good separation quickness that gets open quickly. That's your answer. And hopefully you could appreciate that as it relates to this overall conversation to his target efficiency. There's reasons for this. And so I think credit to all of the offensive coordinators that I mentioned, Josh Heupel, Brian Daboll, and Ken Dorsey, in using him in ways where he can be the most effective. Now, there's some give and take there because obviously there's not much efficiency, or not as much efficiency pushing the ball down the field in terms of targets than it is in the quick game. But if you can't help in the quick game, there's no sense in having you as a frequent option in that area of the field. To me, it just makes sense. So I have concerns about build-up speed, separation quickness, his real ability to execute a full route tree. The other thing, or the next thing, is yards after catch. It's a non-existent component of Gabe Davis's game. He's not a guy that's going to force missed tackles. He's not going to juke guys out. He's not going to win foot races and break pursuit angles. He is not dangerous with the ball in his hands at all. I mean, 2.9 yards average yards after catch per reception. He caught like 48 passes. And how many yards after catch was in the Pittsburgh game on the 98-yard touchdown reception? I mean, yards after catch is just not something that happens for Gabe Davis. Now, again, that does tie into the average depth of target and how he gets opportunities to catch the football, right? They're not the type of routes that lend themselves to a whole lot of yards after catch, but the skill set also doesn't suggest that he's very good at yards after catch. And the last thing in terms of concerns is his hands. He's got a high drop rate. It's been around 10% or north of 10% pretty much every year of his career. And you ask yourself, why? Why are there drops? Well, I think it's because of his technique addressing the football. He is a clapper. He catches the football with a horizontal clap a lot of times. That's not how you're taught to catch a football. You want a firm diamond, or if it's low throw, your palms up with your pinkies close together. And Gabe's clapping at the football. And there's been too many times where he doesn't time up that clap and it hits him in the chest and it's an incomplete pass. And I'm sure Gabe Davis has caught the football this way his entire life. But because of that, you have to live with a drop rate that doesn't need to be as high as it is. And so I hope you can appreciate the things that I said are good about him. And obviously the Bills have done well to maximize those strengths. But at the same time, the concerns are pretty significant in terms of route running, yards after catch, and hands. Those are three pretty big concerns. And I don't see them as strengths of his game. And I'm concerned about how improvable a lot of that is. I think Gabe probably is what he is at this point. Now, hopefully a more healthy Gabe can lead to some more consistency. You know, I certainly am mindful of the ankle injury that he played through last year. It's been well documented. It's been commented on quite a bit by Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, and even Cole Beasley has mentioned it on social media. So I'm aware of it. But I don't know that those are ever going to be strengths of his game. And those are hard things to have as concerns, given the opportunity that he has in Buffalo to be Stefon Diggs, complimentary number 2 wide receiver. So what does this mean for the future? A contract extension. We're going to break that down right after a quick break. So we've talked about the numbers and kind of the accomplishments to this point. I broke down the film and what I've seen from Gabriel Davis. And now let's get to the point of our conversation today where we talk about the future. And Gabe Davis is entering a contract year. Sometime between now and this time next year, the Bills have a choice to make with Gabriel Davis on what to do with him. And they can let him walk and sign with another team, or they can extend him. Now, obviously, that decision is really going to come down to the contract. And I'll say this about Gabe Davis. I think he's got a lot going for him. He's entering a contract year. It's his age 25 season, and he's playing for a team that loves him. Listen to the way Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane talk about Gabe Davis. They praise his habits. Brandon Beane said, if there's any areas where Gabe Davis fell short, I bet you he'll fix them, right? They just rave about the guy. They say nobody outworks Gabriel Davis. It seems like he's a process guy through and through. And so I think he's got a lot going for him. And I'm anticipating another season for Gabe Davis where he'll catch around 50 passes, around 800 receiving yards, and probably around 7 touchdowns, which again is really solid wide receiver 2 production. And that's all good for Gabe as it pertains to what it means for a new contract. And so obviously whenever we talk about contracts, I always consider comparable players and what they got paid, where the market is trending. And I think with the wide receiver situation, there's a lot to consider. And so some recent deals that I think resemble a player that they're similar to Gabe. There's 3 that I would point to. Jacoby Myers, who just signed this offseason with the Las Vegas Raiders for a salary that pays him $11 million on average per season. Allen Lazard with the New York Jets. He signed a contract that pays him it pays him $11 million average annual value. And then Michael Gallup with the Dallas Cowboys, $11.5 million average annual value. And I think that's the right range for Gabe Davis, kind of that $11 million to $13 million, which I think is pretty doable if the Bills want to do it. If the Bills want to bring back Gabe for around $11 million, I think that's possible. Now, there's something that I'd be mindful of with the wide receiver market that I think there's going to be some more movement, right? And as the top goes up, it seems to help everybody. And so the following players are all going to get extensions in the relative near future that will dictate the wide receiver market. And there's some big names here. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Jerry Jeudy. All of those players, I would anticipate receiving contract extensions within the next year. And there's implications there as it relates to Gabriel Davis. And so if Gabe explodes, right? Like let's say he goes out and gets 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. I mean, now he's going to be in that next bucket. I think he probably winds up being $15 million a season or something like that. Because these guys are going to push the top of the market. Not all of them, but Justin Jefferson, I mean, that guy's going to be the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history. North of $30 million a season, I'm sure of it. T. Higgins is going to get a bunch of money, right? I mean, if Mike Williams is a $20 million a year receiver, T. Higgins has got to be 24, 25. CeeDee Lamb with the production he's had with Dallas. Michael Pittman having a nice career with the Colts, and they haven't really given him a quarterback to throw the football to. So I think this wide receiver market's going up, and if Gabe kind of does the 50, 80, 50 catches, 800 yards, 7 touchdowns, I think he's looking at 11 to 13. If he really explodes, then I think he goes up into that 15 million range. And so the Bills will have to consider if that's what they want to do. And obviously, that decision and how they foresee it dictates a lot of the choices that they're going to make at the end of the month in the 2023 NFL draft. Because if you're going to pay Gabe and that's your guy at wide receiver 2, well, are you going to invest pick 27 on your wide receiver 3? I think that changes things. And I think we will learn a lot about the way the Bills perceive Gabe Davis for real, right? They say one thing, but actions speak louder than words, especially in football, with what they do. If they're really trying to get a receiver early, this might be it for Gabe. Obviously, there's a full season to play in. That can change things. But that's what I'm paying attention to. And that's my mindset going into all of it. You can appreciate what Gabe Davis brings to this football team. I do. But I'm also keenly aware of the limitations and how that affects the football team as well as a volume target. Gabe Davis, if he was a 50 to 70 catch a year guy, target a year guy, and you tapped into his strengths, like I'd love him as a wide receiver 4. Would love him in a high volume passing offense, wide receiver 4, like sign me up for that. But he's not, right? He's a wide receiver 2. And so you have to live with some of those limitations. Do you want to? Those are the questions I ask myself as I consider my preferences with Gabe Davis and what the future is with the Buffalo Bills. Folks, I enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you have. We've now done deep dives on Terrell Bernard, Tyrel Dodson, Spencer Brown, Ed Oliver, and of course, Gabriel Davis. I have Ryan Bates down for a future episode like this, but would be curious if there's other players that you'd like me to do. So if there's a player you'd like me to have a conversation like this about, hit me up. Leave a comment here on the YouTube channel. You can send me a tweet at the Joe Marino. Would love some feedback on any other players you'd like me to commit an entire podcast to and really consider them through these types of lenses. I've really enjoyed it and seems like I've gotten some great feedback. So let me know. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. We got some fun stuff in store for the rest of the week, so don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Go Bills. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.